There exists a moment in every man's life when he realizes that the woman looking at him does not actually see him. She sees something else entirely, something she has constructed in the depths of her own mind, a phantom wearing his face, but animated by her expectations. This realization arrives like a cold wind through an open door, bringing with it the uncomfortable understanding that what he mistook for recognition was merely projection. What he believed was connection was actually performance. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the human psyche, diving into territories that most psychologists feared to explore. He discovered patterns in the unconscious mind that explained why relationships follow such predictable cycles of attraction, disillusionment, and separation. What he found was not comfortable. It was not the kind of wisdom that sells self-help books or fills weekend workshops. It was raw, challenging, and deeply unsettling to anyone who had built their identity around being chosen, being loved, being validated by another person. The Swiss psychologist identified something he termed the animus, an archetypal masculine presence that exists within the feminine psyche. This internal figure shapes how women perceive and interact with actual men in their lives. When this animus remains unconscious and unintegrated, it acts like a filter through which every man is viewed, not as he truly exists, but as he fits or fails to fit the template of this inner masculine ideal. The man himself becomes secondary to the projection. His actual personality, his genuine thoughts and feelings, his authentic self becomes obscured behind the veil of what the woman needs him to represent in her psychological landscape. Most men never realize this is happening. They walk through relationships believing that the intense attraction, the passionate declarations, the promises of forever are about them specifically. They believe they have been recognized, understood, chosen for their unique qualities. But Jung's work reveals a more troubling reality. Often, what feels like being chosen is actually being cast in a role, selected not for who you are, but for how well you can embody a pre-existing fantasy. That has nothing to do with your actual identity. This dynamic creates a tragic comedy that plays out millions of times across the world. A man meets a woman who seems to see something special in him. She speaks of potential, of dreams, of futures together. He feels elevated, important, finally understood. He begins to shape himself according to what he perceives she wants, gradually abandoning pieces of his authentic self to better fit the role he believes will secure her continued affection. He calls this love. He calls this compromise. He calls this being a good partner. But something strange begins to happen. The more he molds himself to fit her vision, the less attracted she becomes. The very behaviors he adopted to please her start to repel her. His availability becomes suffocating. His agreeability becomes weakness. His dedication becomes desperation. And he stands there, confused and hurt, wondering what went wrong, never realizing that he was never actually desired for himself, but for his ability to carry a projection that was doomed to fail from the beginning. Jung understood that this pattern emerges from a fundamental error in how both men and women approach relationships. Neither party enters as a complete individual. Instead, they come bearing their unconscious material, their unresolved conflicts, their unlived potentials, expecting the other person to somehow complete what remains unfinished within themselves. The woman projects her animus onto the man, seeing in him the masculine qualities she has not developed within herself. The man, equally unconscious, projects what Jung called the anima, his own inner feminine, onto the woman, making her the carrier of his emotional life, his tenderness, his capacity for feeling. This mutual projection creates what appears to be intense connection, but is actually a hall of mirrors, each person relating not to the other, but to their own unconscious material reflected back at them. The relationship becomes a theater where both parties perform roles they barely understand, reading from scripts they did not consciously write, wondering why the play always seems to end the same way. The process Jung called individuation offers the only genuine escape from this cycle. Individuation demands that a person turn inward and confront the parts of themselves they have avoided, rejected, or projected onto others. For a man, this means facing his own emotional nature, his vulnerabilities, his need for connection, without making a woman responsible for carrying these aspects for him. It means developing his own emotional intelligence, his own capacity for intimacy, his own wholeness, rather than seeking these qualities exclusively through relationship with the feminine. But individuation is not a weekend workshop or a self-improvement program. It is a lifelong commitment to psychological honesty that most people will never undertake. It requires sitting with discomfort, facing one's own shadow, acknowledging the parts of oneself that feel shameful or weak or unacceptable. It means giving up the comfortable fiction that someone else can complete you. That romantic love can save you from the work of becoming whole within yourself. Men who refuse this work remain perpetually adolescent in their psychological development. They bounce from relationship to relationship, each time believing they have found the one who will finally see them, understand them, complete them. They adapt themselves to each new woman's projection, becoming whatever they believe will secure love and validation. They become actors so committed to their roles that they forget they are acting, losing themselves so completely in performance that they no longer remember who they were before they stepped onto the stage. Meanwhile, women trapped in their own unconscious patterns continue to project their animus onto these willing performers. They experience initial attraction to men who seem to embody their internal masculine ideal, only to feel growing disappointment as reality inevitably breaks through the projection. The man they thought was strong reveals vulnerability. The one they saw as mysterious becomes predictable. The hero becomes human. And rather than questioning the projection itself, they conclude that they simply chose the wrong man, that somewhere out there exists the perfect embodiment of their unconscious ideal. Jung observed that modern culture actively discourages the kind of psychological work that would break this cycle. Men are rewarded for achieving external success while remaining emotionally underdeveloped. Women are encouraged to seek fulfillment through relationships rather than through their own psychological development. Both sexes are sold the myth that finding the right person will solve their inner conflicts, heal their wounds, complete their incomplete selves. But this myth serves no one. It creates generations of people who never learn to stand on their own psychological feet, who remain dependent on others for their sense of identity and worth. It produces relationships that are actually elaborate systems of mutual dependency dressed up as love, where each person uses the other as a crutch to avoid dealing with their own unfinished psychological business. The man who begins the work of individuation faces immediate resistance, both from within himself and from the culture around him. His own psyche rebels against the loss of comfortable illusions. The voice in his head that has always sought female validation screams that he is making a terrible mistake, that he will end up alone, that no man can be complete without a woman's love. This voice has been reinforced by centuries of cultural conditioning. That tells men their worth is determined by their ability to attract and maintain female attention. But if he persists, if he continues to sit with the discomfort and face his own psychological material, something remarkable begins to happen. He starts to develop an internal center of gravity. He no longer needs constant external validation to feel secure in his identity. He can stand alone without feeling incomplete. He can be rejected without feeling worthless. He can be criticized without crumbling. He has begun to develop what Jung called the self, the integrated totality of conscious and unconscious contents that represents psychological wholeness. This transformation does not make him cold or distant or unable to love. Quite the opposite. For the first time in his life, he becomes capable of genuine intimacy because he is no longer using relationships to avoid himself. He can see women as they actually are rather than as screens for his projections. He can appreciate their genuine qualities rather than just their ability to make him feel validated. He can love from a place of wholeness rather than need. But this transformation also makes him profoundly threatening to those still caught in unconscious patterns. Women who are possessed by their animus projection find him frustrating and incomprehensible. He does not respond to the usual triggers. He does not chase when they withdraw. He does not crumble when they criticize. He does not perform on command. He simply stands there, rooted in his own reality, refusing to play the games that once defined his entire existence. Some women will attack him for this, accusing him of being emotionally unavailable or unable to commit. What they really mean is that he is no longer controllable through the usual mechanisms of approval and withdrawal. He has stepped outside the economy of validation that governs most relationships. He has become psychologically sovereign, and this sovereignty terrifies those who depend on others' psychological dependency. Yet occasionally, rarely, he will encounter a woman who has done her own work. She has faced her animus, integrated it, and no longer needs to project it onto men. She has developed her own masculine qualities of assertion, logic, and independence while remaining connected to her feminine nature. She approaches relationships not from need, but from wholeness, not seeking completion, but offering partnership. When two individuated people meet, the relationship that emerges is unlike anything most people experienced. There is no desperate clinging, no projection, no performance. Each person stands fully in their own reality while choosing to share their life with another. They do not complete each other because they are already complete. They complement each other, each bringing their whole self to create something greater than the sum of its parts. But such relationships are exceptionally rare because the work required to achieve them is so demanding. Most people will choose the familiar dysfunction over the unknown territory of psychological development. They will continue to project, to perform, to seek in others what they refuse to develop in themselves. They will call this love, never recognizing it as mutual psychological imprisonment. Jung did not offer easy answers or quick fixes. He presented a challenge that most will refuse. Become whole within yourself or remain forever dependent on others' projections for your sense of identity. Face your own psychological material or spend your life running from it through endless relationships that follow the same disappointing pattern. Choose the difficult path of individuation or accept the comfortable prison of unconscious patterns. The work begins with a simple but terrifying recognition. You are responsible for your own psychological development. No woman can complete you. No relationship can save you from yourself. No amount of external validation can fill the void left by refusing to face your own unconscious material. You must turn inward, confront what you find there, and integrate it into conscious awareness. This is not a journey you can delegate or avoid through distraction. It is the essential work of becoming psychologically adult. Men who undertake this journey discover something that contradicts everything they have been taught about masculinity. They find that true strength comes not from suppressing emotion, but from integrating it. Real independence emerges not from avoiding connection, but from being whole enough to connect without losing oneself. Genuine masculinity arises not from performing stereotypical male roles, but from achieving psychological integration that includes both masculine and feminine elements. This integration cannot be achieved through intellectual understanding alone. Reading about Jung's concepts, understanding projection and animus and individuation on a theoretical level changes nothing. The work must be lived, experienced, suffered through. It requires entering the depths of one's own psyche and remaining there long enough for transformation to occur. It demands patience with oneself, compassion for one's own struggles, and fierce commitment to psychological truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. The man who emerges from this process is unrecognizable to his former self. He no longer seeks women's approval as validation of his worth. He does not shape himself according to what he thinks will attract them. He does not perform masculinity according to cultural scripts. He simply exists, fully himself, neither needing nor rejecting connection, available for genuine relationship, but not dependent on it for his psychological survival. This state terrifies and attracts in equal measure. Those still caught in projection find him disturbing because he does not play the expected role. But those who have done their own work recognize him immediately. They see in him not a projection screen, but another human being who has faced the depths and emerged whole. They approach not with need, but with curiosity, not with projection, but with presence. The relationship that becomes possible between two such people transcends the usual categories of romantic love. It is simultaneously more grounded and more transcendent, more ordinary and more profound. There are no grand gestures meant to impress, no desperate declarations of eternal devotion, no anxiety about losing the other's affection. There is simply presence, choice, and genuine appreciation for another human being who has done the difficult work of becoming themselves. Jung warned that this level of relationship would always be rare. Most people lack the courage to face their own depths. They prefer the familiar pain of projection and disappointment to the unknown territory of psychological development. They would rather blame others for their unhappiness than take responsibility for their own unconscious material. They choose comfort over growth, illusion over truth, performance over authenticity. But for those few who accept the challenge, who undertake the lonely work of individuation, who face their projections and integrate their unconscious material, a different kind of life becomes possible. Not an easier life, but a more real one. Not a life without conflict, but one where conflict leads to growth rather than repetition. Not a life without relationship, but one where relationship serves consciousness rather than unconsciousness. The path Jung outlined is not for everyone. It requires a certain psychological courage that many do not possess. It demands willingness to be misunderstood, to be seen as difficult or strange by those who remain unconscious. It means accepting a kind of psychological loneliness. That comes from seeing through the games most people play without even knowing they are playing them. Yet for those who walk this path, who do the work of becoming conscious, who integrate their projections and achieve psychological wholeness, the reward is freedom. Freedom from the endless cycle of projection and disappointment. Freedom from depending on others for one's sense of self. Freedom to love and be loved without the distortions of unconscious material. Freedom to be genuinely, authentically, unapologetically oneself. This freedom cannot be given or taken. It must be earned through the difficult work of psychological development. Each person must face their own unconscious, integrate their own projections, achieve their own wholeness. No one can do this work for another. No relationship can substitute for it. No external achievement can replace it. The question each man must ask himself is whether he is willing to undertake this journey, whether he can face the discomfort of seeing through his own illusions, whether he has the courage to stand psychologically alone long enough to become whole, whether he is ready to give up the comfortable dysfunction of projection for the challenging reality of consciousness. Most will answer no, will continue seeking in relationships what can only be found within themselves. They will continue the dance of projection and disappointment, blaming women for not seeing them while never developing a self worth seeing. They will remain psychological children dressed in adult bodies, playing at love while never experiencing its reality. But some, a rare few, will accept the challenge. They will turn inward, face their depths, integrate their unconscious material. They will emerge transformed, no longer needing others to complete them because they have completed themselves. They will become capable of genuine relationship because they no longer use relationship to avoid themselves. They will discover what Jung knew, that the only way to find real love is to first become real yourself. There is a particular cruelty in how this dynamic perpetuates itself across generations. Fathers who never face their own psychological material raise sons who inherit the same patterns of seeking validation through female attention. Mothers who never integrated their animus raise daughters who project their unlived masculine potential onto every man they meet. The unconscious material passes from parent to child like a hereditary disease, each generation believing they are choosing freely while actually playing out scripts written before they were born. Jung recognized this generational transmission of unconscious patterns and saw in it both tragedy and opportunity. The tragedy lies in the repetition, the endless recycling of the same psychological dynamics dressed in new clothing. The opportunity lies in the fact that any individual who does their own psychological work breaks the chain, not just for themselves, but potentially for their descendants. A man who achieves individuation does not pass on the same unconscious burdens to his children. He models a different way of being, one rooted in consciousness rather than projection. But breaking these generational patterns requires more than good intentions. It demands that a man examine not just his relationships with women, but his entire psychological inheritance. What did he learn about masculinity from his father? What unconscious messages about relationships did he absorb from watching his parents? What cultural myths about love and romance has he internalized without question? These influences run so deep that most men never even realize. They are operating from inherited programming rather than conscious choice. The process of becoming conscious of these influences can be overwhelming. It is like suddenly seeing the strings that have been controlling your movements your entire life. The initial reaction is often anger, followed by grief for all the years spent living according to someone else's unconscious patterns. But this emotional upheaval is necessary for genuine transformation. Without feeling the full weight of what has been lost to unconsciousness, there is no motivation to do the difficult work of becoming conscious. Jung also understood that the journey of individuation does not end with personal transformation. The individuated person becomes a force for consciousness in the world, not through preaching or teaching, but through their very presence. They become what Jung called a monopersonality, someone whose integrated state affects others simply by existing. Their refusal to participate in unconscious projections forces others to become more conscious themselves, whether they want to or not. This is why the individuated man often finds himself isolated. His very existence challenges the unconscious agreements that hold most social structures together. He cannot participate in the casual misogyny that bonds unconscious men. He cannot engage in the projection games that define most social interactions. He stands apart, not from arrogance, but from an inability to pretend he does not see what he sees. The choice stands before every man, stark and uncompromising. Continue the performance, maintain the projection, seek completion in another's eyes. Or undertake the hero's journey inward, face your own psychological material, and emerge whole. The first path is easier, but leads nowhere new. The second is difficult, but leads to freedom. The choice, like the work itself, belongs to each individual alone.